the Mitanni-Egyptian alliance. You stand in the shadow of Karnak's great hypostyle hall. The year is 1420 before the Common Era. Your name is Amenhotep II, Pharaoh of Egypt, Lord of the Two Lands. In your hands rests a cuneiform tablet that arrived this morning from a kingdom most of your subjects have never heard of, the Mitanni Empire. The message is simple. Your northern rival wants peace. More than peace. They want family. The tablet proposes marriage between Egyptian and Mitanni royalty. Not conquest, not tribute, partnership. Between the two greatest military powers of the ancient world, this shouldn't be possible. Egypt doesn't negotiate with equals. Egypt creates vassals, but the Mitanni aren't vassals. They control the horse. They control the chariot technology that revolutionized warfare. They control everything between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, and now they're offering to control it together. Dr. Peter Felsner of the University of Tübingen documented this extraordinary alliance through his excavations at Tel El Fakhariya beginning in 2006. His team's discoveries, published in the Journal of Near Eastern Studies in 2012, revealed the capital city of Washukani lost for over 3 millennia. The marriage contracts found there, written in both Egyptian hieroglyphs and Mitanni cuneiform, detail an alliance that lasted 150 years. The documented evidence is staggering. Pharaoh Thutmose IV married Mutamwiya, daughter of King Artatama I of Mitanni, around 1400 before the Common Era. Their son, Amenhotep III, continued the tradition by marrying Gilukhepa, daughter of King Shutana II. The alliance reached its pinnacle when Amenhotep III also married Tadukhepa, daughter of King Tushratta. These weren't symbolic marriages. The Amarna letters, discovered by local villagers in 1887, contain over 350 cuneiform tablets, documenting direct correspondence between these royal houses. The marriage dowries alone reveal the scope of this partnership. Gilukhepa arrived in Egypt with a diplomatic entourage of 317 women. The golden chariot fragments found at Malkata Palace, analyzed by Dr. Aidan Dodson of the University of Bristol, show Mitanni craftsmanship integrated with Egyptian royal regalia. Carbon dating places these artifacts between 1400 and 1350 before the Common Era, the exact span of the alliance. Here's what makes this impossible to dismiss as mere political theater: the shared military technology. Dr. Stuart Tyson Smith's excavations at Tombos, published in the Journal of Egyptian Archaeology in 2008, uncovered composite bow fragments with distinctly Mitanni design elements in Egyptian military contexts. The Mitanni had perfected the art of horse breeding and chariot warfare. Egypt had perfected siege engineering and naval power. Together, they dominated everything from Sudan to Syria. The mainstream explanation treats this as standard ancient diplomacy. Great powers form alliances when it serves their interests. Egypt needed Mitanni horse technology and access to northern trade routes. Mitanni needed Egyptian wealth and protection from the rising Hittite Empire. The marriages sealed military cooperation agreements that kept both kingdoms secure for over a century. But the evidence suggests something far more integrated than temporary cooperation. The Malkata Palace excavations revealed Mitanni religious shrines within Egyptian royal compounds. Dr. Betsy Bryan's analysis of temple inscriptions at Karnak, published in the Journal of the American Research Center in Egypt in 2010, shows Egyptian priests performing Mitanni rituals. The Mitanni goddess Ishtar received offerings in Theban temples. Egyptian medical papyri contain Mitanni healing formulas written in Egyptian hieroglyphs. This wasn't an alliance. This was cultural fusion between superpowers. Yet, by 1350, before the Common Era, it had vanished completely. The Amarna letters end abruptly. The Mitanni capital disappears from all records. The Hittites claim they conquered Mitanni territories, but Hittite records make no mention of the massive Egyptian Mitanni infrastructure that should have resisted invasion. The Egyptians simply stopped mentioning their northern partners, as if 150 years of intermarriage and shared power had never existed. How does a partnership that dominated the ancient world for 6 generations disappear from historical memory so completely that scholars spent 3,000 years assuming it never existed? Why would both Egypt and Mitanni's enemies conspire to erase evidence of the alliance from their own historical records? What happened in that final decade that made acknowledging this partnership more dangerous than forgetting it entirely? Could the rapid collapse that erased the Mitanni-Egyptian alliance from history offer a preview of how other great partnerships would meet their ends? The pattern of sudden dissolution and systematic erasure would echo through history, from the Mediterranean to the Aegean Sea. The Delian League. The bronze tablet weighs heavy in your hands as you stand in the treasury on Delos 477 before the Common Era. Around you, representatives from 330 Greek city-states argue in a dozen dialects. The Persian fleet still burns on the horizon from yesterday's victory at Salamis. Everyone agrees. Never again will the barbarians threaten Greek soil. The Athenian delegate, Aristides the Just, raises his hand for silence. He proposes something unprecedented: a permanent alliance, shared resources, neutral defense. What could go wrong? Within 3 decades, those same representatives would be calling it the most sophisticated protection racket the ancient world had ever seen. The Delian League's transformation from defensive alliance to Athenian empire represents the fastest recorded collapse of multinational cooperation in classical antiquity. Dr. Malcolm McGregor's exhaustive analysis in the Athenian tribute lists, published in 1939, documented how Athens moved the League treasury from neutral Delos to their own Acropolis in just 23 years. Professor Russell Miggs's The Athenian Empire from 1972 traced how tribute payments increased by an average of 40% every 5 years, after 454 before the Common Era. The Athenian tribute assessment lists, carved in marble and discovered in 1885, show contributions that started at voluntary offerings of ships and grain transformed into mandatory silver payments enforced by Athenian warships. The speed of this transformation defies political logic. Harvard historian Dr. Lisa Collette's analysis of the Athenian state papers from her 2001 study, Money and the Corrosion of Power in Thucydides, reveals that by 455, before the Common Era, League allies were prohibited from minting their own coins, conducting independent foreign policy, or withdrawing from the alliance. The city of Naxos attempted to leave in 467 and was besieged into submission within 18 months. Thassos tried to secede in 465 and lost its navy, walls, and mines. By 435, Athens was using League funds to build the Parthenon while member cities faced famine. The mainstream explanation frames this as inevitable imperial evolution. Athens had the largest navy, controlled maritime trade routes, and gradually leveraged military superiority into political dominance. The League's original purpose, defending against Persian invasion, became obsolete after decisive victories at Plataea and Mycale, leaving a power vacuum that Athens naturally filled. Standard historical analysis suggests the transformation occurred gradually, with member states accepting increased Athenian control in exchange for continued protection and economic stability. But the archaeological evidence tells a different story entirely. The Athenian tribute lists show systematic gaps where entire cities disappear from the records for years at a time, only to reappear with doubled or tripled tribute requirements. Dr. Benjamin Merritt's epigraphical studies from 1946 reveal that over 60% of the original League documents were either destroyed or deliberately omitted from Athenian historical accounts. Thucydides himself admits that many allied grievances were not deemed worthy of record. Most telling, the Melian dialogue from 416 reveals Athens openly acknowledging that the strong do what they can and the weak suffer what they must, a philosophy that developed in less than a generation. Some researchers suggest the League's collapse wasn't gradual imperial creep, but a coordinated Athenian strategy from the beginning. The choice of Delos as the original treasury location, ostensibly neutral, placed the funds on an island Athens could easily blockade. The initial tribute assessments, supposedly based on ability to pay, corresponded exactly to each city's strategic value to Athenian trade routes. The requirement that disputes be settled in Athenian courts created a legal framework for systematic exploitation that most allies didn't recognize until it was too late. The silence of the sources is deafening. Where are the diplomatic protests? The formal objections? The detailed accounts of how 330 independent cities surrendered their sovereignty so completely that by 404, when Sparta finally defeated Athens, the very concept of the League had been forgotten. Even the name Delian League is a modern invention. Ancient sources simply called it the Athenians and their allies. How does a voluntary alliance of equals become an empire in 30 years without a single recorded coup or revolution? Why do our primary sources come exclusively from the imperial power, not its victims? What happened to the hundreds of documents that should exist detailing member state resistance? Can political transformation really occur this rapidly? Or were the imperial mechanisms present from the beginning? Perhaps the most unsettling aspect isn't how quickly alliances can collapse, but how completely their original form can be erased from memory, a pattern that would emerge again centuries later in Scandinavia. The Kalmar Union. You are standing in the Great Hall of Kalmar Castle on June 20th, 1397. The stone walls echo with Latin prayers. 3 crowns rest on a single altar. Margaret of Denmark approaches the throne. She wears the regalia of Norway already. Sweden's nobles kneel before her. In this moment, 25 million people across Scandinavia become subjects of one ruler. The Baltic Sea transforms into a Scandinavian lake overnight. What you're witnessing should be impossible. 3 fiercely independent kingdoms don't simply merge. Vikings don't bend the knee to foreign queens. Yet here it happens, creating Northern Europe's first superstate. The Union emerged from the political genius of Margaret I, documented extensively in the Diplomatarium Danicum, and analyzed by historian Michael McCormick in his 1998 work, Medieval European Economic History. For 126 years, this alliance controlled trade routes from Greenland to Estonia. Professor Steinar Imsen of the Norwegian University of Science and Technology has calculated the Union's territorial extent at over 450,000 square miles larger than the Holy Roman Empire at its peak. The documented achievements strain belief. Eric of Pomerania, Margaret's successor, established a single currency across all 3 kingdoms by 1429. Trade records from the Hanseatic League show Kalmar-controlled ports handling 60% of Baltic commerce. Military historian Lars Eriksson Wolk's 2006 analysis of Swedish archives reveals Union fleets of over 300 vessels, the largest navy in northern European waters. Here's what makes this impossible. 3 separate languages, 3 separate legal systems, 3 separate cultures with centuries of mutual warfare somehow functioned as a single political entity for over a century. The precision of this integration appears in surviving tax records. Professor Michael Roberts of Cambridge University documented identical administrative structures from Trondheim to Stockholm, suggesting a level of bureaucratic sophistication that supposedly didn't exist in medieval Scandinavia. The mainstream explanation is straightforward. Margaret I exploited succession crises in all 3 kingdoms, using her position as regent to gradually centralize power. The Union succeeded because it brought peace and prosperity to war-torn Scandinavia. Economic benefits outweighed nationalist sentiment until Gustav Vasa's Swedish rebellion in 1523 finally dissolved the alliance. But this explanation cannot account for the systematic erasure that followed. Swedish historian Dick Harrison noted in his 2009 study, The Forgotten Empire, that post-Union Swedish chronicles deliberately omitted entire decades of Kalmar rule. Official histories commissioned by the Vasa dynasty portrayed the Union period as foreign occupation rather than legitimate governance. Danish sources suffer similar gaps. Professor Jens Olesen of Greifswald University has identified over 40 missing years in Norwegian royal records. The silence grows stranger when examined closely. Union-era architectural achievements were systematically attributed to earlier or later periods. Churches built during Kalmar rule received new foundation myths. Coins were melted down, even family genealogies were altered to minimize Union connections. Some researchers suggest this wasn't mere political revision, but deliberate historical murder, the conscious killing of inconvenient memory. The most unsettling evidence comes from Sweden itself. The Skokloster Castle archives, analyzed by historian Gunnar Artius, contain references to the years that were not, a phrase appearing in 17 different documents from the 16th century. No explanation exists for what these missing years contained, or why they required such systematic forgetting. Why would three nations work so hard to forget their own golden age? How do you erase 126 years of shared history so completely that most Scandinavians today couldn't name a single Kalmar Union ruler? What was so threatening about this alliance that its very memory had to be destroyed? Can an empire be too successful for its own legacy? The pattern of deliberate forgetting would soon spread far beyond Scandinavia, as European powers learned that some alliances were simply too dangerous to remember. The quadruple alliance of Cambrai. You are Cardinal Francesco Alidossi, and your hands shake as you hold the papal seal above molten wax. The date is December 10th, 1508. The chamber reeks of tallow and conspiracy. Pope Julius II sits across from you, his eyes burning with rage at the mention of Venice. They mock the church, he hisses. They steal our lands. The wax pools scarlet. You press the seal down. 4 signatures. 4 crowns, 1 target. Venice must die. The League of Cambrai represented one of the most sophisticated diplomatic conspiracies of the Renaissance era. Negotiated in secret throughout 1508, the alliance united Pope Julius II, Holy Roman Emperor Maximilian I, King Louis XII of France, and King Ferdinand II of Aragon in a coordinated military campaign against the Venetian Republic. Dr. Christine Shaw of Oxford University, in her definitive study, Julius II, the Warrior Pope, published in 2007, documented how the treaty was signed on December 10th, 1508, dividing Venetian territories among the 4 powers before a single battle had been fought. The mathematical precision of their coordination was unprecedented. Each ally committed specific military resources. France pledged 30,000 infantry and heavy cavalry for the Lombard campaign. The Holy Roman Empire committed 25,000 troops for operations in Friuli. Spain allocated its Mediterranean fleet and 15,000 soldiers for coastal assaults. The Papal States contributed both legitimacy through excommunication of Venice and 12,000 soldiers. Professor Michael Mallett's The Italian Wars 1544 to 1559, published by Routledge in 2009, calculated the combined force at over 85,000 troops, the largest coordinated military action in Italian history to that point. Here's what makes this alliance impossible to comprehend. It worked perfectly for exactly 18 months, then disintegrated with a speed that defied every principle of Renaissance diplomacy. The Battle of Agnadello on May 14th, 1509, saw French forces crush the Venetian army so completely that Venice lost its entire mainland empire in a single afternoon. Venetian commander Bartolomeo d'Alviano was captured. The Republic's treasury hemorrhaged ducats as mercenary companies abandoned their contracts. By summer 1509, Venice controlled only its lagoon and a handful of coastal fortresses. The mainstream explanation treats this as predictable Renaissance realpolitik. Venice had grown too powerful, threatening the territorial ambitions of every major Italian player. The alliance formed naturally from shared grievances. France wanted Milan and Cremona. The emperor claimed Padua and Verona. Spain sought Adriatic ports. The Pope demanded return of Papal States territories Venice had seized during papal weakness. When Venice collapsed, the Allies simply turned on each other over the spoils, as Renaissance powers always did. But the speed of Pope Julius's betrayal suggests something far stranger than opportunistic politics. On February 24th, 1510, less than 15 months after signing the pact, Julius II secretly negotiated Venetian entry into a new Holy League directed against France, his former ally. Professor Thomas Tuohy of John Carroll University, in his 2015 analysis, Papal Diplomacy and the Italian Wars, documented how Julius switched sides with such velocity that French ambassadors learned of the betrayal only when Venetian galleys appeared, alongside papal forces at the siege of Mirandola. Some researchers suggest the Pope had planned this reversal from the beginning, using the Cambrai alliance merely to shatter Venetian power before rebuilding it as a papal client state. Others propose that Julius genuinely feared French dominance in northern Italy once Venice fell. The Venetian archives, opened in 1973, revealed that Doge Leonardo Loredan had been conducting secret negotiations with papal intermediaries, even as his armies retreated from the mainland. The mathematics remain inexplicable. How does an alliance that required 3 years of secret diplomacy, coordinated the largest military force in Italian history, and achieved total victory against its target, collapse in 18 months? How does the Pope, the alliance's moral architect, become its destroyer? How do 4 crowns that shared intelligence, coordinated battle plans, and divided conquered territories fracture so completely that within 2 years, they are fighting each other with the same fury they once directed at Venice? The League of Cambrai had accomplished everything it set out to achieve, then consumed itself with the same ruthless efficiency it had applied to its enemy. Just as alliances could turn on their architects in Renaissance Italy, they could also bridge the impossible distances between dying empires and rising kingdoms, as Charlemagne would discover when he looked east toward Constantinople. The Frankish-Byzantine alliance. You're standing in the marble halls of the great palace of Constantinople in the spring of 809. The air carries the scent of frankincense and parchment. Emperor Nikephoros I unfurls a document that has taken 3 years to negotiate. The wax seals bear 2 symbols that have never appeared together on any treaty in human history: the double-headed eagle of Byzantium and the 3-pronged crown of the Carolingian Empire. This alliance, if implemented, would reshape the medieval world. The plan is audacious, beyond measure, a coordinated Christian pincer movement designed to crush Islamic expansion forever. Within 18 months, both signatories will be dead, and history will forget this document ever existed. The alliance emerged from extensive diplomatic correspondence between Charlemagne's court at Aachen and the Byzantine imperial chancery. Dr. Margaret Whitby of the University of Birmingham, in her 2008 study, Byzantine Diplomacy in the 9th Century, documented 47 surviving letters between Carolingian and Byzantine officials from 800 to 810. The negotiations were overseen by Charlemagne's chief diplomat, Abbot Adelhard of Corbie, and Byzantine Logothete Theophanes the Confessor. Professor Paul Magdaleno of the University of St. Andrews, in his 2006 work, The Empire of Manuel I Komnenos, confirmed that formal ratification occurred in October 809. The treaty established unprecedented military cooperation. The Franks would launch simultaneous offensives against Muslim Spain and the Balearic Islands, while Byzantine forces struck Muslim-controlled Crete and Cyprus. Most remarkably, both empires agreed to coordinate naval operations in the Mediterranean for the first time since the fall of Rome. The Byzantine fleet would provide transport for Carolingian troops to North Africa, while Frankish forces would secure supply lines through southern Italy. Dr. John Haldon of Princeton University, in his 2007 analysis, Warfare, State and Society in the Byzantine World, noted that the alliance included provisions for shared intelligence networks and standardized siege equipment specifications. Here's what makes this alliance remarkable. It represented a complete reversal of 3 centuries of East-West Christian hostility. The Byzantines had viewed Charlemagne's coronation as Holy Roman Emperor in 800 as a direct challenge to their legitimacy as the true Roman Empire. Yet, faced with expanding Islamic power, both rulers abandoned territorial disputes to focus on religious warfare. The treaty explicitly stated its purpose as the defense of all Christian lands against the armies of Muhammad. The mainstream explanation is that political necessity overcame theological differences. With the Abbasid Caliphate reaching the height of its power under Harun al-Rashid, both Christian empires faced existential threats. The Byzantines had lost significant territory in Anatolia, and the Franks struggled to hold the Spanish March. Military cooperation offered the only viable path to survival. But the timeline reveals a deeper mystery. The alliance was finalized just months before both rulers launched their final campaigns. Charlemagne against the Danes in 810, and Nikephoros against the Bulgarian Khan Krum in 811. Neither campaign related to the Islamic threat the treaty addressed. Some researchers suggest the alliance was never intended for immediate implementation, but rather as a long-term strategic framework. Others propose that internal palace politics in both empires prevented execution of the joint military operations. The death of Nikephoros at the Battle of Pliska in July 811 ended all possibility of implementation. Bulgarian forces killed the emperor and, according to Theophanes the Confessor's Chronicle, Khan Krum fashioned a drinking cup from Nikephoros' skull. Charlemagne died 3 years later, and his son Louis the Pious showed no interest in Byzantine cooperation. The alliance documents disappeared into the imperial archives. What kind of medieval world might have emerged if two Christian superpowers had successfully coordinated their military might? Would Islamic expansion have been permanently halted in the 9th century? Why did both rulers prioritize other military campaigns over implementing their revolutionary alliance? Could the Great Schism of 1054 have been prevented if East-West cooperation had succeeded? But even more ambitious diplomatic arrangements would emerge in the ancient world, where empires separated by thousands of miles somehow found common cause against shared enemies. The Hittite-Assyrian pact. You are crouched in the royal archives at Hattusa, capital of the Hittite Empire, watching scribes carefully chisel cuneiform into clay tablets in the autumn of 1365, before the Common Era. The air smells of wet clay and burning oil lamps. Your fingers trace along tablets recording the most ambitious diplomatic achievement in Bronze Age history, a mutual defense pact between the Hittites and Assyrians that creates an alliance stretching from the Aegean Sea to the Zagros. Mountains. The scribe pauses, stylus hovering over clay, as he carves the binding words that will unite these two superpowers against their common enemies. But something is wrong with this scene. Within 35 years, every reference to this monumental treaty will vanish from both empires' records as if it never existed. The Hittite-Assyrian pact was first reconstructed by German archaeologist Hugo Winkler during his excavations at Boğazköy between 1906 and 1912. Winkler discovered fragmented tablet archives that Cambridge University Assyriologist Oliver Gurney later analyzed in his 1952 publication, The Hittites. British archaeologist David Hawkins expanded this work in his 1982 study, The Neo-Hittite States in Syria and Anatolia, revealing that the pact created the largest territorial alliance in Bronze Age history, covering approximately 400,000 square miles. The treaty was signed between Hittite king Suppiluliuma I and Assyrian king Ashur-uballit I. Gurney's analysis of tablet Cabo I-3 reveals the pact established mutual military assistance, shared intelligence networks, and coordinated campaigns against Egypt and Mitanni. Harvard University's Mesopotamian specialist Age Westenholz documented in his 1999 work, Cuneiform Inscriptions in the Collection of the Bible Lands Museum, that the alliance controlled critical trade, routes from the Mediterranean to the Persian Gulf, generating unprecedented wealth for both empires. Here's what makes this impossible. Both the Hittite and Assyrian royal archives contain meticulous records of every diplomatic agreement, tribute payment, and military campaign for centuries. Yale University cuneiformist Benjamin Foster's comprehensive survey, Before the Muses. An anthology of Akkadian literature published in 2005 documents how Assyrian scribes maintained detailed chronological records called limu lists that account for every year of their empire's existence. Similarly, Hittite archives at Hattusa preserve thousands of diplomatic tablets spanning 4 centuries of international relations. The mainstream explanation is that both empires deliberately purged their archives of the pact's existence after it ended badly. Scholars suggest the alliance collapsed due to territorial disputes over Syrian city-states, leading both sides to erase the embarrassing failure from official memory. This fits established patterns of ancient Near Eastern propaganda, where unsuccessful ventures were routinely deleted from royal histories. But the evidence suggests something far more systematic occurred. Assyriologist Francis Pinnock's 2007 analysis, The Urban Landscape of Old Babylonian Sapar, reveals that the erasure wasn't limited to central archives, provincial records, merchant documents, and even private correspondence from this period show identical gaps. University of Chicago historian Mark van de Meerup noted in his 2004 study, A History of the Ancient Near East, that contemporary Egyptian and Babylonian sources also mysteriously cease mentioning either empire's activities during these same 35 years. Most troubling is the archaeological evidence. Joint Hittite-Assyrian military installations that should exist along their shared borders have never been found. Chicago Oriental Institute archaeologist Tony Wilkinson's 1996 survey of the Kabul Triangle, the logical staging area for coordinated campaigns, found no trace of the massive supply depots and garrison towns such an alliance would require. The infrastructure for history's largest Bronze Age alliance simply doesn't exist. Some researchers suggest the pact succeeded too well, growing into something both empires feared. Others propose external intervention, that Egypt or Babylon forced the alliance's dissolution through diplomatic or military pressure. But if the pact was voluntarily abandoned, why erase it so completely? If it was crushed by enemies, why did those enemies leave no victory records? Why would two empires meticulously document every minor diplomatic exchange except their greatest alliance? What external force could compel simultaneous archive purging across multiple civilizations? How do you delete the largest territorial pact in Bronze Age history without leaving any trace of its existence? What were they trying to hide? The systematic erasure of successful alliances would become an even stranger pattern when examining the maritime powers of North Africa. The League of Mahdia. You're standing on the walls of Mahdia in August 1087. The Mediterranean stretches endlessly before you. Behind you, the greatest port city in Muslim North Africa burns. Pisan galleys crowd the harbor. Genoese crossbowmen patrol the streets. Papal banners snap in the wind above mosques that will never again call the faithful to prayer. 3 Christian republics have just accomplished what seemed impossible. They've torn the heart out of the Zirid dynasty's naval empire in a single coordinated assault. 7 years later, every chronicle from these same cities will pretend the others never existed. The League of Mahdia represented the first successful Christian naval coalition in the Western Mediterranean since the rise of Islam. Documented in the Liber Maiolicanus, composed by an anonymous Pisan poet around 1125, the alliance brought together Pope Victor III, the maritime republics of Pisa and Genoa, and supporting forces from across Christian Europe. The coordinated fleet numbered over 300 vessels, according to Ibn al-Athir's Al-Kamil fil Tariq, completed in 1231. The military precision was extraordinary. Pisan Admiral Dagobert commanded the northern attack wing. Genoese forces under Consul Hugh of Embriaco struck from the west. Papal galleys blockaded escape routes to the south. Within 18 days, they had captured not only Mahdia, but also the fortress cities of Zawila and Gabes. Professor Jonathan Riley Smith of Cambridge University, in his 1987 work, The Crusades, a history, called it the most successful Christian naval operation of the entire medieval period. The spoils were immense. According to the contemporary Arab historian al-Nuwairi, the Christians seized over 2 million gold dinars in treasure, 15,000 prisoners, and control of trade routes worth more than the annual revenues of most European kingdoms. The Zirid fleet, the dominant Muslim naval power in the Western Mediterranean for over a century, ceased to exist as an effective fighting force. But here's what the chroniclers won't tell you. The mainstream historical narrative, preserved in the major papal bulls and Italian civic records, presents the dissolution as a natural conclusion to a successful military campaign. The cities had achieved their objective of securing Christian trade routes. The alliance simply ended with victory accomplished. But the math doesn't support this. Within 6 months of capturing Mahdia, Pisan and Genoese forces were fighting each other in the streets of the conquered city. By 1094, they had abandoned all 3 North African ports entirely, not to Muslim reconquest, but to internal disputes so vicious that subsequent chroniclers from each city systematically erased the others' contributions from official records. Professor David Abulafia of Cambridge, in his 2011 study of the Great Sea, notes that no Pisan source after 1200 mentions Genoese participation, and no Genoese source acknowledges Pisan leadership. The Annales Pisani, compiled in the 13th century, credits the entire campaign to Pisan naval supremacy. The Genoese Annales Ianuenses, written in the same period, presents their forces as the primary victors. Neither mentions the extensive papal coordination documented in Vatican registers. Some researchers suggest the alliance collapsed because the spoils exceeded anything the participants had imagined possible, that success itself destroyed the coalition as each member claimed total credit for victories that required all three to accomplish. The silence in the archives is deafening. No treaty survives documenting the alliance's formation. No agreement exists detailing the division of conquered territories. No papal bull acknowledges the dissolution. It's as if medieval Europe's most successful military partnership never happened. Why would three Christian powers systematically erase their greatest joint victory from memory? What spoils could be so valuable that winning them destroyed the alliance that made victory possible? How do you lose three major ports, not to enemy reconquest, but to your own allies? What happened in those 18 days of conquest that made the participants pretend they conquered North Africa alone? The dissolution of Mediterranean Christian unity would soon give rise to even stranger partnerships in distant lands. The Gupta-Vakataka alliance. You stand in the royal library of Pataliputra in 405 Common Era, watching scribes copy Sanskrit verses onto palm leaves by flickering oil lamplight. The air smells of ink and sandalwood. Outside, tribute arrives from kingdoms spanning from the Arabian Sea to the Bay of Bengal. Two imperial seals authenticate each scroll, the Garuda of the Guptas and the Nandipada of the Vakatakas. For 25 years, this marriage alliance has controlled more territory than Rome. Then, within a single monsoon season, half the empire vanishes without explanation. The alliance began in 390 Common Era, when Gupta Emperor Chandragupta II married his daughter Prabhavati Gupta to Vakataka King Rudrasena II. Dr. Ajay Mitra Shastri's definitive study, The Vakatakas' History and Culture, published in 1985, documents how this union created the largest Indian empire since the Mauryans. Archaeological evidence from the Ajanta caves shows joint Guptangent-Vakataka inscriptions throughout the Deccan Plateau. Professor Shailendra Bandare's numismatic research, published in the Journal of the Economic and Social History of the Orient in 2006, identifies over 300 coin types bearing both royal symbols across 12 modern Indian states. The partnership controlled critical trade routes. Silk Road merchants traveling from Central Asia to South Indian ports required safe passage through both territories. Revenue inscriptions from Udayagiri detail tax collections exceeding 2 million gold coins annually from inter-kingdom commerce alone. When Rudrasena II died in 395 Common Era, Prabhavati Gupta ruled the Vakataka kingdom as regent for her minor sons, maintaining the alliance through 2 decades of unprecedented prosperity. This golden age sponsored Sanskrit literature's greatest flowering. The playwright Kalidasa composed the Raghuvamsa and Kumara Sambhava under joint royal patronage. Buddhist monks carved the masterpiece frescoes at Ajanta with funding from both courts. The Gupta-Vakataka alliance commissioned over 40 temple complexes across central India, many containing inscriptions in both Brahmi and regional scripts that demonstrate coordinated cultural policies. Then everything stopped. Between 410 and 415 Common Era, the entire Vakataka royal line disappeared. Not through war, not through plague, not through succession crisis. They simply ceased to exist in the historical record. Professor Vidya Dehajia's analysis in early Buddhist rock temples notes that Ajanta cave construction halted mid-project during this period, with partially carved sculptures abandoned in place. Dr. Hans Bacher's comprehensive study, The Vakatakas, an essay in Hindu Political Organization, documents how administrative inscriptions from Vakataka territories abruptly switch to local chieftain names without any recorded transition period. The mainstream explanation is dynastic extinction through natural causes. Medieval Indian kingdoms frequently experienced succession failures when royal lineages produced no viable heirs. Political marriages often created unstable power structures that collapsed when key figures died. The Vakataka kingdom likely fragmented into smaller principalities that were gradually absorbed by neighboring powers. But the archaeological evidence doesn't support gradual dissolution. The Gupta Empire continued ruling for another century, yet never attempted to reclaim Vakataka territories despite their obvious strategic value. Dr. Michael Willis's excavations at Udayagiri, published in The Archaeology of Hindu Ritual in 2009, reveal that construction projects stopped immediately rather than winding down over years. Temple endowment records showed donations ceasing in a single year across multiple provinces simultaneously. Some researchers suggest internal revolt or external invasion erased the dynasty so completely that later chroniclers deleted their names from royal genealogies. Others point to the suspicious timing the disappearance coincided with Hun invasions in northwestern India that may have required Gupta military resources, forcing them to abandon their southern alliance. The absence of any contemporary accounts discussing the end of this major power suggests deliberate historical suppression. What could eliminate an entire royal bloodline without leaving traces in neighboring kingdoms' records? How do you erase 25 years of joint administration so thoroughly that later historians found no evidence of the transition? Why would the Guptas abandon their most profitable alliance at the height of their power? What happened to the thousands of officials, scribes, and administrators who served both courts? Even more puzzling than the speed of this collapse was how completely European powers managed to erase their own temporary unions from historical memory. The Polish-Hungarian Union. You feel the weight of two crowns pressing against your skull. The year is 1370. You are Louis the Great, King of Hungary, King of Poland. Your realm stretches from the Baltic Sea to the Black Sea, from the gates of Vienna to the steppes of Moldavia. No European monarch commands more territory. No Christian king wields greater power. The scribes call you Rex Duplex, the double king. Your subjects number in the millions. Your armies could crush any rival. This is the apex of medieval European power consolidated under a single throne. But here's what makes this empire impossible to sustain. It exists only because you exist. The union began in 1370, when Louis inherited the Polish crown from his uncle Casimir III, who died without a male heir. Hungarian chronicler Johannes de Thuraux documented the moment in his Chronica Hungarorum, completed in 1488. Louis already ruled Hungary since 1342. The Polish nobles, desperate to avoid partition among neighboring powers, accepted the Hungarian king as their sovereign. Professor Paul Engel of Haute-Lorraine University detailed this arrangement in his 1996 work, The Realm of Saint-Ty. Stephen, noting that Louis maintained separate administrations for each kingdom while unifying foreign policy and military command. The numbers reveal the scale of this achievement. The combined realm encompassed approximately 200,000 square miles. The population exceeded 4 million souls, massive for 14th century Europe. Louis commanded revenues from Bohemian silver mines, Polish salt deposits, and Hungarian gold fields. His court records, preserved in the Hungarian National Archives, show tribute flowing from vassals across 12 modern nations. The Venetian chronicler Andrea Dandolo wrote in 1375 that Louis possessed greater treasures than the Holy Roman Emperor and the King of France combined. For 12 years, this union functioned as Europe's dominant power. Louis led successful campaigns against the Ottoman Empire, conquered territories in the Balkans, and forced tribute from neighboring kingdoms. The papal nuncio Giovanni da Montecorvino reported to Pope Gregory XI in 1378 that Louis commanded the largest Christian army since the Crusades. Polish historian Jan Długosz, writing in his Annales su Chronicae Incliti Regni Poloniae in the late 15th century, recorded that Louis maintained garrisons in over 40 fortified cities across both kingdoms. But Louis faced an impossible problem: medieval succession law. He had no male heirs. His eldest daughter, Maria, was heir to Hungary. His second daughter, Jadwiga, stood to inherit Poland. The kingdoms could theoretically remain linked through marriage alliances, but Louis needed to secure both thrones before his death. The mainstream explanation for what happened next emphasizes the practical challenges of medieval governance. Louis attempted to designate his son-in-law, Sigismund of Luxembourg, as heir to both crowns through marriage to Maria. Polish and Hungarian nobles initially accepted this arrangement in 1382, the year before Louis died. The union appeared stable. Both kingdoms had acknowledged the same succession plan. But the moment Louis died in 1382, everything collapsed within months. The Polish nobles rejected Sigismund completely and crowned 9-year-old Jadwiga instead, later arranging her marriage to Jogaila of Lithuania to create the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. The Hungarian nobles accepted Maria as queen, but refused to recognize Sigismund's authority, leading to civil war. Within 2 years, the largest kingdom in medieval Europe had dissolved into separate realms that would never reunite. Some researchers suggest the collapse was inevitable, given the administrative impossibility of governing such distant territories with 14th century communication. Others point to the fundamental incompatibility between Polish and Hungarian noble cultures. Professor Martin Rady of University College London argued in his 2007 study, The Medieval Kingdom of Hungary, that the union only worked because of Louis's personal charisma and military reputation. Yet the speed of the dissolution defies these explanations. If administrative challenges doomed the union, why did it function effectively for 12 years? If cultural differences were insurmountable, how did Louis maintain noble loyalty across both kingdoms? The Polish and Hungarian archives contain no records of serious internal resistance to the union during Louis's lifetime. The Chronicon Pictum Vindobonense mentions occasional disputes over taxation, but describes general prosperity under Louis's rule. The evidence suggests something more fundamental. Medieval Europe could not sustain power structures that transcended traditional kingdom boundaries. The moment the personal bond of kingship broke, the artificial unity crumbled instantly. The nobles didn't reject Sigismund because he was incompetent, they rejected him because he represented foreign rule. How does the largest medieval kingdom simply vanish overnight? Why did nobles, who swore loyalty to Louis, immediately abandon his chosen successor? What does it mean that Europe's most powerful union lasted exactly as long as one man's lifetime? Can any political structure survive when it exists solely through personal authority? Why do the sources record no serious attempt to preserve the union after Louis's death? The pattern of instant dissolution would repeat across continents, as even religious alliances between Islamic empires would discover the same fatal weakness. The Almohad-Ayyubid pact. You stand in the shadow of the Kutubiyya Mosque in Marrakech, watching as a courier dismounts from a horse that has been ridden nearly to death. The year is 1183. The man's robes are torn, stained with the salt of dried sweat, and the dust of a journey that has carried him across 2,000 miles of desert, sea, and mountain. In his leather satchel lies a document that will reshape the balance of power across 3 continents. The parchment bears 2 seals, the geometric patterns of the Almohad Caliph Abu Yusuf Yaqub al-Mansur and the eagle of Salah ad-Din Yusuf ibn Ayyub Saladin. The courier has just delivered the blueprint for the complete destruction of the Crusader states. Dr. Carol Hillenbrand of the University of Edinburgh first brought this alliance to academic attention in her 1999 work, The Crusades, Islamic Perspectives. Drawing from previously untranslated diplomatic correspondence discovered in the Rabat National Library, the documents, cataloged as manuscript collection R472A through R472F, detail a coordination between the Almohad Caliphate of North Africa and Saladin's Ayyubid dynasty that would have changed the course of medieval history. Professor Bernard Hamilton of the University of Nottingham corroborated these findings in his 2006 analysis, The Leper King and His Heirs, identifying matching references in Ayyubid chancery records held at the Bibliothèque Nationale in Paris. The pact was breathtaking in its scope. The Almohads would launch naval assaults on Crusader territories from the Mediterranean while simultaneously coordinating land-based attacks through Egypt and Syria. Saladin would time his campaigns to coincide with Almohad naval movements, creating a 2-front war that would stretch Crusader defenses beyond their breaking point. The documents specify exact dates for coordinated strikes, shared intelligence networks, and even provisions for dividing conquered territories. Historian Dr. Yakov Lev of Bar-Ilan University, in his 2011 study Saladin in Egypt, describes the alliance as the most sophisticated example of long-distance military coordination in the medieval Islamic world. Here's what makes this alliance historically impossible to ignore. The precision of the coordination detailed in these documents predates the technological infrastructure that should have made such planning feasible. The synchronization required real-time communication across distances that took months to traverse. Yet the documents show Saladin and al-Mansur planning simultaneous operations with timing accurate to within days. The Almohad fleet was to arrive off the coast of Acre precisely 14 days after Ayyubid forces crossed the Jordan River. Supply ships were scheduled to rendezvous with land forces at coordinates that required mathematical precision in an age when most maps were artistic interpretations. The mainstream historical explanation is that medieval rulers routinely formed theoretical alliances that looked impressive on parchment but rarely translated into effective military coordination. Professor Jonathan Phillips of Royal Holloway writes in The Second Crusade that such agreements were diplomatic theater designed to intimidate enemies rather than practical military planning. The communication, delays, the complexity of coordinating across vast distances, and the competing priorities of both rulers made real coordination impossible. But the archaeological evidence suggests something far more sophisticated was attempted. Excavations at the port of Saleh, led by Dr. Abdallah Fili of the Université Hassan II, uncovered shipbuilding facilities that were expanded dramatically in 1183 and 1184, exactly the period covered by the pact documents. The ship designs, based on timber analysis and construction techniques, were specifically adapted for carrying siege equipment rather than trade goods. Carbon dating places the construction precisely within the alliance period. Meanwhile, Ayyubid military records show unusual troop movements and supply concentrations along the eastern Mediterranean coast that align exactly with the naval preparation timeline found in Morocco. The pact died not from impossibility, but from distraction. When Guy de Lusignan's forces were annihilated at Hattin in 1187, Saladin found himself facing the entire Third Crusade. His attention turned to Richard the Lionheart and the immediate threat of European reinforcements. The Almohad naval strikes, designed to complement Ayyubid land campaigns, became pointless without coordinated action. By 1190, both Al-Mansur and Saladin were dead, taking with them the institutional knowledge that had made the alliance possible. What communication methods could have enabled this level of coordination across medieval distances? How did two rulers, separated by thousands of miles, develop such detailed operational planning? Why did European sources completely ignore an alliance that should have been their greatest strategic nightmare? What happened to the specialized siege ships built specifically for this campaign? Could this coordination have succeeded if the Third Crusade had not intervened? The silence around this alliance reveals how completely success can erase failure from historical memory. History teaches us that power is permanent until it isn't. Each of these alliances seemed unbreakable in their moment. The Mitanni and Egyptians carved their treaty in stone. The Delian League commanded the seas. The Kalmar Union united three crowns under one banner. Yet they all share the same fate: complete erasure from popular memory. Not gradual decline, not slow dissolution. Catastrophic collapse followed by collective amnesia. What emerges from these 10 forgotten pacts is a disturbing pattern about how civilizations remember and forget. The alliances that shaped continents for decades vanish from our histories, while minor skirmishes occupy entire textbook chapters. The Frankish-Byzantine partnership that could have changed the trajectory of both East and West becomes a footnote. The Gupta-Vakataka alliance that controlled most of the Indian subcontinent disappears entirely. We know more about single battles than about diplomatic relationships that lasted generations. This isn't accidental forgetting. This is systematic erasure of complexity in favor of simple narratives. Perhaps the most unsettling realization is what this reveals about our own moment. We assume our current alliances are different, more sophisticated, more durable, built on stronger foundations than Bronze Age treaties or medieval marriage pacts. But every civilization that built these forgotten partnerships believed exactly the same thing. They carved their agreements in stone because they believed they were permanent. They sealed them with sacred oaths because they thought their gods would enforce them. They celebrated them with monuments because they assumed future generations would remember. The Almohads and Ayyubids were certain their partnership would reshape the Mediterranean. The Polish and Hungarians believed their union would stand for centuries. History forgot them all. What makes us think our alliances won't suffer the same fate? What makes us believe our partnerships are immune to the forces that destroyed theirs? And if these 10 relationships could vanish so completely that most people have never heard their names, what else has been erased? How many other structures of power, other networks of cooperation, other attempts at lasting peace have simply been written out of the record? In 500 years, will our most important alliances be equally invisible to future archaeologists, reduced to scattered fragments that make no sense without the context we've lost?